Alright guys, so my Rippaverse catch-up continues, because today we are going to talk about ISOM number 3, since I have finally gotten a chance to read this book. So this book is the conclusion of the Ill-Advised arc, which this book was a very long time coming. ISOM number 2 came out all the way back in, 2023? And this book came out, I think it was around like late spring, early summer of last year. So a pretty long wait, made even longer by myself just being perpetually behind on everything all the time. But that aside, I did finally get a chance to read this book, and overall I was quite satisfied with it. I did think it was a nice wrap-up to this story arc. This book was written, of course, by Eric July, the founder of the Rippaverse, and the same writer for the other 2 issues of ISOM we've gotten so far. Artwork still done by Cliff Richards, again the same artist. However, we did have a new colorist with this book, since Gabe El-Taib could not return from ISOM 1 and 2. I think he's just too busy doing his own stuff now. But we got a new colorist on this book in Sebastian Chang, who I did think did a very good job with the colors in this book. Overall, art-wise for the book, I would say actually that out of the 3 ISOM issues, this book probably did have the best artwork of all 3. You can see a noticeable improvement from Cliff Richards' work going from 1 to 2 to 3. So that was something very nice to see. Now, as far as the story itself, giving some, of course, spoiler-free thoughts up front here. This book was obviously meant to be the conclusion of this first story arc, the Ill-Advised arc, which, as far as any finality to it, there was mostly the finality involved the character development for Avery himself, going from how the character was at the beginning of ISOM 1 to the closing of this book. That was the main story here, and I do think that was done very well. They did leave a lot of plot lines open for future issues of ISOM going forward. There's at least 2 or 3 different plot threads going on that they didn't fully wrap up, some which were really just getting started by the end of this book. So we definitely got some fertile territory to go into the future. One thing I will say about this book compared to ISOM 1 and 2, those first 2 books dedicated a lot of space to, introducing all these new characters and setting up the world and establishing all this stuff that was going to be fleshed out in other separate books, like with Alpha Core and Yaira and all of them. And I think that came at the cost of the narrative of those books a little bit, since, that was kind of distracting from the main story to do all this side stuff and set up all these things. Which I think ISOM 3 did a much better job of staying focused on the main plot line. It didn't have to set up all that stuff since all that work has already been done. There was 2 new characters introduced in this book, but they didn't really steal the spotlight from the main action going on, the main story going on, the main conflict between Avery and Darren. All that was still heavily the focus. So despite the new characters being introduced, it didn't pull that spotlight anywhere near as much as the first 2 issues of ISOM did. So I think that was to this book's benefit. You got a much tighter story, you got a much more focused narrative, and it really pulled you into the action and what was happening in this book more, so you were able to get more invested into it. We also did finally get some information about ISOM's powers. I know that's been a recurring thing that, has been a topic of discussion ever since the first ISOM released. We didn't find out everything, but we found out just enough to really get your noggin jogging and get some speculation going and get you thinking about, what other details about this they're going to reveal in the future. So I was happy with the level of information we got there. I'm glad they did give us some solid info on that. So we can kind of, speculate and discuss and talk about, what possible other information we could get in the future. But I thought they struck the right balance there of giving you something to chew on, but not, giving away too much to where the entire mystery is just blown. So I thought they rolled that rail just right. There was also two really big, like, surprise plot twists in this book that I personally didn't see coming, one of which I feel like I really should have, looking back, but both of which I thought were cool. So overall, I was very satisfied with this book. I feel like it is the strongest of the 3 issues of ISOM that we have gotten so far. Like I said, being able to remain more focused on that main conflict and the main plot line, I think benefited it to a large degree. And if you look at all 3 pieces of ISOM as one overarching story, which is obviously what they're meant to be, things do flow very well and make a lot of sense. So I think this was a strong finish to this first story arc. This is the first time Rippaverse is really giving us a conclusion to a story arc that's, longer than a one-shot like Horseman or something. So I think they nailed the landing on this. I think it was solid, and I think it does set up a lot of good things going forward for ISOM number 4 and beyond. But anyway, with all that being said, we are going to get into spoiler territory as we go through the events of this book. So, as usual, if you don't want to know anything that happens, you have been warned. So, real fast, the first thing I did want to mention here, just because I thought it was kind of funny, as soon as you open the book, you do get a splash page of ISOM that has a little disclaimer at the bottom about how ISOM is not associated with the International School of Ministry, which, if you've been following that entire fiasco, I just kind of got a chuckle out of that. But anyway, moving along from that, when we get to the actual start of the book, the story does pick up right where ISOM number 2 left off, with Avery still in the cave full of devlings that they rescued Sam from at the end of ISOM 2. So Avery is still in there fighting off some of the last devlings that are left, and during this fight he realizes that his powers are actually starting to fail him, and his punches don't quite pack as much punch as they usually do. So something is wrong and he doesn't really know what's going on. So the devlings are fighting back against him, and they're starting to get the better of him with his powers giving out, until eventually Bloodruth's Shadow Wolves show up to save the day. So they help fight off the devlings and rescue Avery and get him out of the cave. So while this is going on, it cuts back to Bloodruth and Sam arriving back at Bloodruth's castle, where she ends up actually sending Sam home in Avery's truck and telling him that, if Avery makes it out of the cave, then she'll make sure he makes it back. So she ends up going inside once Sam leaves, and she uses the sample of blood she took from the dead people that were held in the cell where they found Sam back in the cave. And she uses her blood magic on that blood to figure out exactly what happened there to all those people. So she sees a vision of this new deviling creature that looks like some kind of sorcerer or something. It's not the same one from the last page of ISOM 2, who appeared to be some sort of leader. This is a different one. But apparently he used some kind of magic staff thing and sacrificed all these people. So Bloodruth learns what happened through that, and then uses her powers to sketch the faces of all these people, I guess, so she can figure out exactly who they all are. So then Bloodruth is interrupted in the middle of this by her Shadow Wolves returning, packing a beat-up ISOM back to her. So she goes out to check on him, and we get a conversation between the two of them where Avery's talking about there's something wrong with him, and his powers are failing him, and he's trying to see if maybe Bloodruth knows anything that can help him. And this is where we get the first hint at some of the details about ISOM's powers, because he mentions that he is something called a peeker, which this elicits a response of shock from Bloodruth, who doesn't even believe that's a real thing. She thought it was just a myth. So we don't really know exactly what that is yet, but apparently ISOM is a peeker. So anyway, we cut away to another scene taking place at the Brookbriar Country Club, a golf resort somewhere a few days later. So we go inside here and we see a meeting between Darren Fontano and Michael Copper, where Michael is actually trying to convince Darren to sell him Club Merc. So this is a callback to, the brief scene we got in ISOM 1, where we saw, Michael and Lillian in Club Merc sort of checking out the place. They end up making an offer to Darren to try to buy it, but Darren doesn't seem too interested in this idea. So he ends up turning Michael Copper down, and Michael leaves and meets up with Lillian again, where he reveals that Darren also owns this country club. So, Darren's got his fingers in a lot of pies there. So anyway, one of Darren's thugs ends up coming up to him and telling him that some of their men are in position. And Darren says that he doesn't want any casualties, he's just trying to lure him out. So we cut away to see what they're talking about, and we actually cut to the house of Avery's parents, Jacob and Harriet Silman, which these are characters that we've seen before in their earlier years in the Great War Separation #1, but this is the first time we've seen the present-day versions of them. So they're just hanging out in the backyard, kind of, Dad's cooking on a barbecue, and Mom's got a pie in the oven. So they're just kind of talking about what's been going on lately, until a bunch of Darren's men end up jumping the fence and attacking them. So Darren's dad, Jacob, ends up getting into a fight with about 3 of these guys out in the backyard, while some other of Darren's men end up going inside and going after Harriet in the house. And this is actually where we get the first big surprise twist in this book, since while Jacob is, getting taken down by all the guys on the outside, he's not able to get inside to help out Harriet. So we see Harriet getting beat up by these guys, and one of them even smashes like a kitchen table chair over her back. But then Harriet just no-sells it and gets up, and we get the reveal that Harriet is also an Accept, with powers very similar to ISOM's. So she gets up and proceeds to just kick the ass of all these guys with enhanced speed and super strength. So she takes out all of Darren's thugs in the house and ends up dispatching them through the front door. But then after taking them all out, Jacob manages to fight off the guys in the backyard and run into the house to check on Harriet. And Harriet acts like all those guys just left voluntarily. And Jacob suggests, they go hide in the safe room with a shotgun. So apparently, Harriet is an Accept, but her husband does not know about this. And she is hiding the fact that she has powers and took those guys out on her own from Jacob. So that's an interesting development there. So after this, we get a flashback back to Avery's high school years, where he is working part-time at Dorset's pawn shop. So we get to meet Mr. Dorset, which is Avery's boss, and we get a conversation between them where Mr. Dorset is talking about how, Avery's been doing a good job here, but it's time for him to sort of step up and take on more responsibilities. So he ends up giving Avery some money, and he's sending him to go out on a pick of his own. So for the first time, Avery's going to get to go out and, buy some merchandise from someone in hopes of, getting something good to pawn off. So our young Avery ends up going to the house of someone named Mr. Murphy, who has an old barn in the back that's full of some old junk that he's trying to get rid of. So Avery goes inside to sort of check out what he's got and see if he can find anything worth buying off this guy. So we see him find some old comic books that seem to be worth some money. And then he finds something in a box that he is very surprised about, that we do not see the contents of. So he finds something good, but we don't know what it is. So he ends up buying this stuff from Mr. Murphy, and he rushes back to Mr. Dorset to show him what he's found. But Mr. Dorset won't even look at it. He doesn't want to know what Avery bought, and he tells Avery that whatever he has in that bag is his. And he's going to let him set off on his own to basically, start his own pawning business, since, there isn't really much chance for advancement just working for him. So he's sort of helping out Avery here and giving him a chance to kind of start out on his own. And he talks to him about, what he maybe wants to do for himself in the future. And Avery talks about how he'd like to buy some land someday. So an interesting look back at Avery several years ago. So then we cut back to present day, where Avery is now arriving at his parents' house to check up on them, since he heard about, them getting attacked by Darren's guys. So the police are already there, checking out the place and getting statements from them. So one of the police officers actually almost recognizes Avery, since, he had a little run-in with the law in ISOM #1. But Avery just kind of keeps going. So we end up getting a very interesting scene here, where he goes into the backyard and is having a conversation with his mother. And this is another big part where we get some insights into both of their powers, actually. since Avery is wanting to talk to her about how, he's not as strong lately as he normally is. So Harriet brings up the fact that she could already tell that he was losing his powers just from the hug that he gave her when he first showed up. And she brings up Jasmine and says that Avery did the right thing, but he's doing it for the wrong reasons. So she talks about how Avery actually peaked at an earlier age than she did. So again, that's a callback to the peaker thing that was mentioned earlier. And said that Avery can also do things that she was never able to, but she claims that how they got their powers is seemingly atypical from how most accepts end up with their powers, and that there's a lot that they still don't really know about it, which is why they are actually keeping the fact that they have powers secret from both Avery's father and sister. So that actually comes with the revelation that Altona doesn't know that either one of them have powers either. Which I actually didn't even realize that Altona wasn't in on it. Obviously, in ISOM 1, we got that scene where, Vassie was sort of starting to figure out that ISOM had super strength and he was trying to keep her quiet. So that puts that into more context now as well. So Harriet and Avery have powers, but Jacob and Altona have no idea that either one of them are X-Hips. So that sets up a very interesting dynamic going forward as well. So anyway, Harriet and Avery continue to talk about their powers, and we get some more very important details here. Since Harriet mentions that one member of each generation of their family apparently has these peaker powers, and it goes all the way back to one of their ancestors who was apparently healed years ago in Galilee, which I believe is a region in northern Israel, somewhere in the Middle East. So apparently something happened in their bloodline several generations ago where one of their ancestors was healed from something, and this apparently bestowed powers to their entire bloodline, but it only manifests in one person each generation. So Harriet is the one for her generation, and Avery is the one for his. But she says that these powers and these gifts require an absolute stasis. So she says that Avery's intentions are just as important as his actions. So the takeaway from this here is that the reason ISOM's powers are faltering lately is because he didn't have the proper intention behind his action. Basically, his state of mind and his motivations for what he's doing can actually affect his abilities. So when he's motivated by something righteous and something good, like protecting someone or saving someone, like trying to save Sam, then, his powers work fully and everything can be fine. However, if he's more motivated by anger or revenge or, going after Darren or, doing something with more selfish motivations, then his powers can actually falter on him. So that is a very interesting concept that Avery actually has to keep his mind right, basically, in order to be able to do anything at all. So I guess that pretty much rules out, any possible future ISOM heel turn or anything. He has to do the right thing or he can't have his powers anymore. So that's very interesting. That's a kind of unique dynamic here for ISOM. So anyway, Harriet ends up telling him that, he may have peaked, but he hasn't reached his full potential yet. So they're teasing ISOM being able to do even more things that we haven't seen him be able to do yet. So anyway, after sharing a nice moment with his dad where he basically reassures Avery that, he's got his back if he needs it, then we cut back to the ranch, where Avery is actually doing some target practice with Sam. So we get a nice scene with them again where Sam is reassuring Avery that he's always going to have his back, and we get a nice little tidbit about Sam in this as well, where we find out that Sam actually used to be in prison. And Avery sort of, gave him an opportunity once he got out to have this job. So we get a nice bro moment between them before Sam ends up leaving, and Avery actually ends up calling Lincoln Eusebio, Altona's boss at Projectus, which Lincoln had already offered to help Avery, in ISOM 2. So this is basically Avery just taking up Lincoln's offer. So they end up working out an agreement to meet at one of Projectus' sites that is near Avery to talk about a plan. So after that, it cuts away to a scene that night outside of J. Sully Ward, which is a location that we haven't seen before, although it was mentioned in Yaira number 1, which apparently this place is some sort of institution for excepts who maybe can't control their powers, or maybe more the criminal elements and they need to be kept under control. So imagine like an Arkham Asylum-esque kind of place, I guess, for excepts. So we see some security guards outside there, and they're talking about how, there's a special agent on duty tonight named Max Salient, who is a new character we never heard of, who we will be introduced here to shortly. But first, these two guards end up getting attacked by a giant reptilian monster, who we find out is named Lepredo. So Lepredo ends up taking out a bunch of these guards, including a bunch more that arrive in 2 Hummers. And he actually ends up launching one of these Hummers into the air and taking out a helicopter. So we get a very cool fight scene here, Lepredo just destroying stuff left and right, until one of the helicopter pilots is falling from the crashing copter, and he is saved by the aforementioned Max Salient. So we meet this new character, who is obviously an except. He flies in and rescues this fallen guy, and then confronts Lepredo, where it is also revealed that there is some sort of history between the both of them, since Lepredo mentions that Salient is now protecting the place that caused both of them a lot of strife. So apparently both Lepredo and Salient were once held inside J. Sully Ward, but now Lepredo is trying to get revenge on the place, while Salient is actually working for the place. So they took very different paths, obviously, with Salient even mentioning that, it was a prison for Lepredo, but it was therapy for him. So apparently the doctors or whoever at this ward ended up helping Salient, be able to control his powers better, I guess. So anyway, just before the two of these guys can start fighting, we hear a big explosion off in the background, and this distracts Salient long enough for Lepredo to escape. So we don't quite get the confrontation between two of them just yet. So then we cut to the meeting between Lincoln and Avery, where we find out that, in ISOM 2 we learned that, Darren had some moles on the inside at Projexus, inside Lincoln's company. Well, it turns out that Lincoln actually had some moles in some of Darren's businesses as well. So Lincoln has been spying on Darren. He's even got some cameras set up in Club Merc that Darren doesn't know about. So he's got some inside info on Darren to give to Avery. And Avery is talking about maybe going back and confronting him at Club Merc again. But Lincoln tells him that that's a bad idea. And instead, Darren is going to be having a meeting soon in order to try to buy an oil refinery from some guy. So he thinks that would be a better place to confront him, since there's less people around, and, it's less likely that, Darren's going to start some trouble when he's trying to secure a deal on something. So they end up making a plan to confront Darren there instead, and, Lincoln tells Avery to not go in alone. So after that, we cut away once again to Gooding's house, where we get an update on Sam, since Sam is there getting checked out by Gooding, where he's performing some tests on the markings that was carved into Sam's back that, again, we saw in ISOM number 2. So he runs these tests, and basically he doesn't learn anything from them. Obviously, these markings are not normal, and Sam knows that they randomly start glowing sometimes, but he's not having any pain from them, and, they're not causing any issues. They're just there and occasionally glow. So obviously that's not normal and shouldn't be happening, but they don't really know why it's happening or how to solve it or anything. And Sam also mentions that whoever was in the security house that initially kidnapped him actually wasn't one of the Devlings. Which the Devlings is what was inside there, when Avery showed up later. And obviously, Sam was being held by the Devlings in the cave. So that means there's some sort of mystery accomplice with these Devlings that got a hold of Sam and actually took him to the cave to begin with. So there's a whole nother element to this situation that we actually don't know what it is yet. So it ends up jumping ahead to that Sunday, where Darren is meeting with a guy named Mr. Brandt at the Brandt Oil Refinery. So Darren's attempting to buy this entire operation from this guy, and he's talking about how, it's been in his family for generations. So he ends up taking Darren and some of his guys on a tour of the place. And while this is going on, Avery actually manages to sneak in. He pays off one of the employees there to buy his extra uniform from him. So Avery sneaks in, pretending to be an employee of this oil refinery. So while all this is going on, Lincoln is trying to call Avery, and he can't get a hold of him, so Lincoln sort of realizes that, Avery is hauling off alone, even though he told him not to. So Lincoln ends up calling someone else, and tells him that he needs to get there before things get bad, so we don't know who Lincoln is talking to. But anyway, it cuts back to the oil refinery, where we see Avery confronting Darren in the middle of his tour, where Avery is telling Darren that, they can just let all this go and go their separate ways and not let it escalate any further. But Darren doesn't really have any interest in that. He's tired of putting up with Avery's crap. And Darren tells him that he's got two options. He can either let his guys take him back to Club Merc and sort of make an example out of him, where they just kind of beat him up, and says that he'll survive, maybe. But his only other option is to fight them and end up dying. So Mr. Brandt doesn't like any of this randomly going on, on his property. The guy he's potentially going to sell to getting into fights with some rando. So Avery ends up ripping off the, uniform that he bought off of the employee, and he's got his ISOM suit underneath. So ISOM ends up fighting off some of Darren's guys, while Darren takes Mr. Brandt back to his office to sort of get away from the chaos. So back in Mr. Brandt's office, he's chewing out Darren, saying that he doesn't appreciate him, showing up and starting all these problems, and talking down to him, and, doing all the crap that Darren usually does. So Mr. Brandt is refusing to sell the place to Darren. The entire deal is off because of this fiasco. So he's telling Darren to take his men and get out of here. And he's even reaching under the desk, grabbing a gun he has hidden under there in case things get even more rough. So Darren talks about how, he hates that that's how this worked out. But Darren ends up whipping out a gun of his own and turning around and just blasting Mr. Brandt right in the chest and blowing him away. So Darren just straight up kills Mr. Brandt right in his office. And then takes his fucking cowboy hat too. Like, the audacity of this guy. So meanwhile, Avery is still fighting all of Darren's thugs outside. And despite his powers, not being at full strength, he is still getting the better of them. But more backup shows up. So Avery's trying to convince them to, listen to reason and let's not just keep fighting. But these guys aren't hearing any of it. They're doing what Darren told them. So Avery ends up trying to run away from them, actually. And he manages to misdirect them and get away for a minute. But before he can get too far, he actually gets attacked by Lepredo. Lepredo is working for Darren as well. So Lepredo ends up attacking Avery and pretty easily taking him down. So ISOM fights back against him, but, with his powers not being at full strength, he doesn't have much success. So Lepredo beats up on Avery for a while and actually ends up throwing him into, like a big, for lack of a better word, silo of oil. I don't know the proper terms for oil refinery parts. But anyway, he gets thrown into this metal tower that's full of oil. So Lepredo tells one of Darren's guys to do it. So the guy ends up pulling out a gun and shooting the oil and causing a massive explosion with ISOM right in the middle of it. So he blows up part of the oil refinery. So Darren ends up storming out of the office down there to this giant explosion and, wondering what the hell's going on here. So Lepredo says that, he just thought the deal was off. So he decided to blow up the place. So Darren says the deal is off, but, he didn't ask him to do all this. But anyway, none of that really matters because Darren got what he was actually here for, which is this weird green stone crystal thing, which he says is uncured metroxy, which is apparently some kind of natural resource. So Darren says that, this is what he was really after and it's something that's going to change all their lives and has the potential for them to quadruple their revenue. So this is the real thing that Darren was after. He wasn't after the oil refinery. He was after this metroxy stuff. And he's got some grand scheme for it. But Darren's little speech is interrupted by one of his guys going flying across the background and wiping out some of his other guys that were just standing there. And it is revealed that that guy was tossed by Santuan. who, if you remember, is the except from ISOM 1, who was working for Darren, and Darren fired him in ISOM 2 since he lost to Avery. So Santuan is showing up again, and he's saying that he was never paid for his previous work with Darren, so he is demanding some compensation. So obviously Darren doesn't want to give him any money, so this leads to a really cool fight scene between Santuan and Lepredo, where they're actually pretty evenly matched, but they end up beating the shit out of each other until Lepredo finally manages to throw Santuan into the explosion. So Darren thinks that, he not only managed to take out ISOM, but he took out Santuan as well, until Lepredo goes flying out of the flames and crashes down in front of Darren, and Santuan emerges seemingly unharmed from all this. So apparently Santuan is a lot more badass than we first expected as well. So it looks like Santuan is about to attack Darren again, trying to get his money out of him, until he is stopped by the arrival of Jasmine. So this is the first we've seen Jasmine since ISOM 1, which is of course the start of all this. This is the woman that Altona, said it went missing and thought that she was tied up in Darren's goings-on. And she's the one that asked Avery to, look into what happened to Jasmine in the first place. So Jasmine is suddenly here on the scene, and this is where we get the second big shock twist of the story, where Jasmine walks up to Santuan, and it's revealed that Jasmine is an Except as well. And she creates some kind of little, time bubble around them, where basically she can freeze anything in time that's inside this bubble. So she freezes Santuan, so he can't move. He's basically stuck in time. So this gives Lepredo the opportunity to come up and grab Santuan and just send him flying. So with Santuan out of the picture, Darren ends up revealing the full scope of his plan, where he's talking about how resources, over time can become more valuable. So Darren ends up throwing the Metroxy to Jasmine, and she uses her little time bubble thing, and apparently she ages the Metroxy. I'm not totally sure if she ages it forwards or backwards, or exactly how these time powers that Jasmine has works. But anyway, she turns this Metroxy stone thing into this little circle of green liquid, I guess. So I don't know exactly the details here, but she's turning this Metroxy stuff into a more valuable state. So that was Darren's big plan here, and what he's been having cooking with Jasmine is he's trying to use her powers to get a hold of this Metroxy stuff and increase the value of it so he can become even more rich than he already is, I guess. So while this is going on, it cuts to Lepredo, who's still beating the shit out of Santuan. So Santuan is just getting his face pounded in, until Lepredo is stopped by ISOM, who emerges from the flames, unharmed. So ISOM is okay, and he fights back against Lepredo, and manages to actually best him this time. He beats the shit out of Lepredo and takes him down, and comes walking out of the flames, dragging him by his tail, which looked pretty badass. So Lepredo is taken down, and ISOM confronts Darren once again. And Darren actually ends up just pulling a gun on him, saying he's tired of this shit. So Jasmine steps in, and she's trying to handle it instead. So Jasmine is confronting ISOM, telling him that he should have stayed out of this, and saying that, she's a grown woman and doesn't have to listen to what her mother tells her and all that. So Jasmine is showing no remorse for teaming up with Darren. And she tells ISOM that, she'll tell the Selmans they died an honorable death. So Jasmine traps ISOM in one of her little time bubble things so he can't move, and Darren gets ready to shoot him. But she has to take the time bubble down or it'll stop the bullets as well. So she takes the bubble down, but ISOM manages to jump out just in time and tackle Darren and take him down before he can get shot. So all of Darren's guys end up pulling guns on ISOM, and ISOM tells Jasmine to make her little time bubble thing again, when she does at the last second, and manages to stop the bullets and save both of them. So Darren was willing to sacrifice Jasmine in order to take down ISOM. Despite her being a key part of his plan, apparently she still didn't hold enough value to him to, worry about her getting caught in the crossfire. So ISOM makes it clear to Jasmine that, Darren is completely cold-hearted and will sacrifice her at a moment's notice. So ISOM gives a little speech where he's talking about how, he at least tried to do good, and how God showers down blessings upon them. And he says that that's why he can't be held by these silly little tricks. So ISOM actually manages to break out of Jasmine's little time bubble thing. He's not being trapped like Santuan was. So he ends up just punching the ground and sending Darren and his guys flying in the shockwave. So ISOM warns Darren to, stay away from his family and not cause them any more problems. So he tosses Darren on his ass and goes to leave. And as he's leaving, he actually walks over to Santuan, and he actually helps Santuan back up to his feet. And is trying to help him out, and Santuan's talking about how nobody has his loyalty before just collapsing face first onto the ground. So ISOM actually picks up Santuan on his shoulders and carries him out of, the burning refinery, as he actually says a Bible quote on the way out talking about, forgiving your enemies. So as they're leaving, we get one last attack on both ISOM and Santuan from Leopardo, who emerges from the flames and is trying to power up and take them down. But before he can really do much of anything, Leopardo gets taken out by the arrival of Max Salient, who appears to save the day, which it is revealed that Max is the person that Lincoln was talking to on the phone. So he sent Max in to save ISOM since he knew he was getting into a situation that he shouldn't be getting into. So Max Salient ends up taking down Leopardo and tells him that on the authority of J. Sully Ward, he is being detained. So it looks like Leopardo is going back to the ward. So right at the end here, we do get two little wrap-up scenes where, first of all, we cut to a few days later, where Avery is arriving at someone's house. So he ends up opening the door, and we see it's a random guy that we've never seen before. And this guy just hauls off and immediately punches Avery in the face. So it ends up being revealed that this guy and his wife are actually the parents of the girl, the cosplay girl, that ISOM failed to save years ago, which was the reason that he stopped being a hero to begin with. So he's showing up here at that girl's parents' house, and we get a conversation between them where, they're obviously sort of blaming ISOM for not being able to save their daughter. And ISOM is basically just owning up to it. He's admitting that, he failed that day and he made a terrible decision in stopping being a hero. And now he's asking them to give him some time and to stay in contact with him. And he's going to do everything in his power to try to hunt down Shadran and get some justice for what happened to their daughter. So that's obviously setting up a more long-term plot point for ISOM going forward, a long-term villain for him to hunt down. So we get that scene, and then we also get one last scene back at Gooding's place, where ISOM is back there talking to him, where Gooding apparently has some kind of idea about how ISOM's powers work, and he starts to say something about movement, and he gets cut off mid-word. It looks like he's about to say isometric or something. Maybe, I don't know what he's saying there. But we can't really get the full scope of that because they get interrupted by Bloodruth arriving. So Bloodruth is here to tell them that the cave that was full of devlings is now completely abandoned. All the devlings have disappeared somewhere. So Gooding and ISOM and Bloodruth all discuss the information they have about these creatures, and Gooding brings up the fact that he knows that the devlings weren't actually the ones in charge, and he puts up a picture of the sort of leader devling thing that we saw at the end of ISOM 2. So he knows that they're the real threat, and that these creatures are the ones that are capable of interdimensional travel. So they're how the devlings got here in the first place, and the devlings are just sort of servants for these guys. So he's saying that they definitely didn't just show up here randomly, and there is something bigger going on here. But they don't know why they're here or why they're after Avery. And they need to figure out what exactly is going on and what these deviling things are up to. And that is how the book ends. So overall, I did very much enjoy this book and very much enjoy this entire arc. The overarching story here is, of course, the character development of Avery himself. At the beginning of ISOM 1, he was, living this more secluded ranch life. He had gotten away from being a hero. He felt guilty for failing to save that girl years ago, and that was sort of the impetus for him giving up that whole life. So he went from being just sort of on his own and wanting to be left alone and run his ranch and just do his own thing to accepting the guilt for what happened to that girl, realizing that, giving up being a hero was the wrong decision and that far more people have gotten hurt over the years because, he wasn't there to at least try to save some of them. So he's sort of come to terms with his own past and he's reversed that decision. He's going back to being a hero now. He's committed to doing the right thing. He's trying to get justice for the girl that was murdered by Shadran. And all of this ties into his powers as well, since we know now that, his motivations and his mindset actually ties into the strength of his abilities. So the fact that he is sort of getting past that guilt and getting past that personal struggle in order to pursue the righteous path is actually opening up the door to him not only being as strong as he used to, but potentially being even stronger. So I thought that was a nice, complete character arc for him. It didn't wrap up all of the actual plot points. We found out what was going on with Jasmine, but obviously it didn't get stopped. I mean, it looks like she's still going to be working with Darren, even though she knows that Darren, will turn on her at a moment's notice. So we've still got the entire plot of them trying to refine that green stone shit. So we'll see where that goes. We've got the plot of ISOM hunting down Shadran, which seems to be like a more long-term plot to me. That'll probably be an overarching story for several issues. And then, of course, we have the more immediate plot of figuring out what's going on with the Devlings and the marks on Sam's back and that whole story that was introduced in ISOM 2. So they've set up several plot threads here going forward for future arcs and future issues, all of which I think are pretty interesting. The two new characters they introduced in this book, Max Salience, he didn't leave a huge impression on me. We didn't really get enough of him for me to really decide, how much interest I have in him. We got a few little tidbits about his history. Obviously, he used to be at J. Sully Ward, and now he's working for them. But we only got little glimpses of his powers, and really only the bare minimum on his character. So I'd like to find out some more about him before I can really get a good judge on him as a character. Lepredo I really liked. I thought he was a great, sort of monster of the week style villain. He's working for Darren here, but, he failed like Santuan did, so he might be looking for some new employment too. And of course it looks like he's going to be locked up back in the ward again, so we might had to have a prison break for him to be able to do anything else. But I liked Lepredo as a villain. I would like to see him pop up again in the future. Like I said, I was pretty satisfied with the way they sort of rode the rail on revealing stuff about ISOM's powers. The whole Peeker thing is very interesting. The concept of ISOM's motivations and his mindset affecting his powers, I thought was something pretty cool. The fact that his mother is also an Except is something that I did not see coming at all. That definitely came out of left field for me. And I think it's pretty cool as well. Which that whole concept of, their powers being inherited by one member of each generation, that got me thinking, I wonder if at some point in the future Vassie could end up showing signs of being a Peeker as well. Since, at least for right now, she's the only Silman of that generation, since she's Altona's daughter. So that could be very interesting in the future, especially since Altona doesn't even know that her mother and brother are Excepts. If her daughter starts exhibiting some Except powers, then, she's definitely going to be thrown for a loop on that. So that leads to some very interesting stories in the future as well, I think. I also thought the sort of, for lack of a better word, biblical element, I guess, the sort of Christianity element to ISOM's powers was also interesting as well. Now, I'm no Bible scholar by any means, so I'm sure some of this probably went over my head. But there was definitely several allusions to stuff. Obviously, ISOM has the cross on his outfit. He did the Bible quotes as he was packing out Santuan towards the end. The location where it mentioned that his ancestor was healed was Galilee, which is a location that is mentioned in the Bible multiple times, I believe. So there's obviously some Christian influence on this. And of course, the powers being set up as sort of like a gift from God that only work if you're, of a righteous mindset. That sort of fits with that as well. So all that was really intriguing. I wonder, how deep they're going to go with that. But it'd definitely be interesting in future issues of ISOM to find out more and more about ISOM's powers, the details about how they work, more details on exactly what a peaker is, and potentially the heights of ISOM's power, since his mother talked about how he can possibly do things that even she couldn't do. So all that would be very interesting to see in the future. But beyond that, this book did introduce a ton of new questions in my mind, not only about just ISOM's powers and stuff, but about a lot of things. This Metroxy green stone stuff, I'd like to get more details about that. We've got the dangling plot point of what the hell did young Avery buy from that dude's barn in the box. That never was revealed. So I hope we get some more flashbacks following up on that storyline as well. My first thought of that, since we know that his powers is tied to his bloodline, maybe what he found in the barn has something to do with the bracelet that he had in ISOM 1, which was not mentioned again after that. We saw him, after he left the hospital, he had that bracelet on, and I thought maybe that was the source of his powers or tied to his powers in some way, but maybe not. Maybe it's something else. If it's some kind of magical artifact or something, I don't know what it was doing in this rando's barn, but, we got a mystery here, and I'm just speculating. So, I'd like to see what was in that box that he bought all those years ago. I'd like to see where they go with Santuan's character, since they didn't really redeem him here, because he was really just trying to get revenge on Darren. But it was nice to see Santuan again. They made his character a little bit more interesting, since it seems like his power level is a lot higher than we initially expected, since he just tanked that explosion and came out of it mostly fine. He did collapse later, but, he seemed like... At first, when we saw him in ISOM 1, he seemed just like a superpowered thug, but it seems like there might be more to his powers and more to his character overall. So I'd like to see him again, maybe even potentially doing a redemption arc with him at some point. I think it'd be interesting. I thought they did a great job with Darren's character. Darren is just an absolute piece of shit, and that's great in a villain like that. He's completely cold-hearted, he's cutthroat, he just shot Mr. Brandt point-blank range with zero remorse. He went after Jasmine, even though, he needs Jasmine for this big plan of his. He didn't even care if it meant getting Avery. So Darren is one of, if not the best villain they've introduced so far in the Rippaverse, and I really liked his characterization here. But yeah, overall, I absolutely recommend this book. Now, since this book's release, they actually did do a giant, collected ISOM omnibus that has ISOM 1, 2, and 3 all in one book. Now, I did not pick that up because I already have all 3 books individually, so I just wanted to save the money and not double dip right now. At least I might get it down the road at some point. But if you don't have any of these books, you can just buy that one thing and get the full story, which I would recommend going that route, since individually they aren't bad, but together I think they are much stronger. Obviously, it's meant to be one overarching story, so having the complete thing in one package is probably the best route to go if you haven't already invested in any of these books. But regardless of which route you end up taking, I do recommend ISOM as a whole, ISOM 3, the entire ill-advised arc. I did enjoy it. I think Eric did a good job with the writing. I think the artwork was fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to what we get in ISOM number 4 and beyond down the road. So anyway, I will be back at some point, hopefully pretty soon, with more Rippaverse catch-ups. I still have a giant stack of Rippaverse books to get through. It's right over there, actually. It's staring at me. I feel it. But I think the next one I'm going to be doing is Great War of Separation number 2. I think that's the next one in the stack. I'm trying to do these in order. But anyway, until then, I guess that's all I got to say. So, lots of luck to you and yours.